Okay, getting back to DNS and domain names, if we want to do a little bit of research on domain names, we're going to use a tool called Whois. That's going to be your go-to tool. You've probably heard of it, if not used it a few times on your own. And basically, Whois allows you to research the domain's ownership. Now, unfortunately, things have changed a lot. Privacy is big these days, right? So a lot of times ownership or domains are registered anonymously. But Whois is really a good place to start. And there's a number of good web-based tools that allow you to perform the Whois lookups. Okay. I use centralops.net. It's just one I use. Like I said, there's others. I like it because it handles a bunch of other things for me all at once. So if we look at it, I do a Whois on google.com. Not only do I get back information on registry, but I also get the IP address of the server. That's the public IP address that we talked about. And that helps me in my investigations when I'm starting to look for things. If I'm investigating a domain name, one of the first things I need to know is where is that domain located? Where's the server that's located on? So, Central Ops does that for me all at once. And there we go. And you notice, if the domain is tied to an IP version 6 one, you see it. So you have the 172 up top, which is your IP version 4. And now we know underneath it what that is. That's your IP version 6. Not a big deal right now. You can stick with the IP version 4 for your research and investigations. So when you see it, that's the one you want to note. Okay, we're going to go ahead and talk now about Whois records and some of the information we can gather from basic public open source information known as the Whois record. Whois has been around it's a tool that's been around forever. It was originally designed so when you registered a domain name, they publicly released the information. You can find out email addresses or contacts or technical contact about who owns the domain name, right? This is back in the early days of the internet when, privacy was non-existent and everybody just shared everything because who cared, right? Okay, so I use a service called Central Ops. Now, Central Ops is one of many different services that offer Whois functionality. Aside from just the domain registration, they also offer a few other services, as you'll see, which is why I like them. They kind of bundle a few things together, mainly the things I need right away to get a good overview when I'm researching a domain name. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start here. I'm going to take a very generic name like google.com, right? Google runs pretty much everything on their own, obviously. So a lot of the records and things you're going to see all link back to Google. Nothing hard about investigating this domain name, but gives you a good idea of what we're looking at. So we start off, we put in google.com in there, and it's going to give us 3 default lookups. The domain Whois record, that's the ownership information that's on record. The network Whois record, that gives us some information about the actual internet address that's been assigned to this domain name. And then the DNS record, which pulls some information about the different routing features, routing structure of the domain name, right? So, a domain could be for mail, right? It could be for web hosting. It could be for, FTPing in or, remote access, whatever it might be. They're all tied to the domain name. They go to different places. They can go to different servers, and the DNS record will point us in those different directions. Okay, so right from the beginning, you got google.com and the IP address, right? So this is going to tell us when I go to google.com, what is my computer going to resolve, what IP address, and that's where it's going to go. So if I'm in a web browser, my web browser is going to send a network request out to this address on port 80, which is what the web server is listed on, and I'm going to get fed Google's website. So the domain record, which is what you see at the top, this gives us information about who owned the domain name, who registered, when it was registered. It was registered here by markmonitor.com, which is some service. It looks like it was created back in 1997, back in the way early days of the internet. Somebody was smart enough to register this, right? And that just tells us about the creation date and things like that. Understand that if a domain expires and then gets re-registered, it'll have a new creation date, okay? An updated date would be if it's the same owner re-registering it every year, changing some information, that would be the updated date. So just because a creation date of 2007 might exist doesn't mean the domain may not have been registered in 2003 for 2 years through 2005, then expired out and then re-registered. So just careful how you read the dates there. One of the important things we'll see right from there is the name server. Okay, this tells us the name of the servers, usually 2 or more, that control the record for this domain name. Obviously, in this case, google.com runs their own, so name servers 1, 2, 3, and 4 contain the records for Google, and we'll see that at the bottom of this report. Next up is going to be the actual contact information. This is your business contact information. It's going to give me the tech information, like that would be the technical contact, the administrative contacts, okay, and some of the registered, the business name, the business information things. So in this case, we can see that it was registered by Mark Monitor. If you have any problems with this domain name, you can go here to that that email address. This tells us that Google is located in California. The basic stuff that you'd find. Do not be surprised if you see something like enom or domains by proxy. Almost everyone who registers a domain now isn't putting their public information out there, and they're just simply going to use a service or a company that registers on their behalf and pushes their information out there. So publicly, you're not going to see much information most of the time, and I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. Okay, coming on to the network who is. This is actually kind of important. This is where people get a little confused. So we take it, what this network record section does is it takes the IP address that we resolved google.com to, and it shows us what block of IP addresses, what range of IPs that falls in. Now, when the internet's being structured, Aaron, who takes care of IP address assignments in America, they don't just hand out one IP address for everybody. They hand them out in large blocks. A /16 right here is a pretty large block of a couple million addresses, I think. But you can see it's 172.217.00 through 172.217.255. I'm sorry, /16 to 65,000 addresses. I should have known that. But either way, it doesn't matter. You can see it's a pretty large block. And then this IP address falls within that range of that block. So Aaron, who we get our information from, says, "Oh, when we assigned that block of IPs, we gave them to Google." So that's how we know the company. That's usually most companies don't get their own IP address assigned to them; they get them from their internet service provider. Which again, I'll show you in a few minutes. But since we're dealing with Google does everything on their own, so it's not very helpful at the moment. And then this is the organizational record for the IP block. Now, it's not for the domain name. This is again, we're in the network section of the query. So this information belongs to the IP address range. Okay. There's some more contact information, etc. At the bottom here's the DNS record. So DNS records could have a ton of information in them. Obviously, the most important thing is what we call the A record, the address record, and that is what IP address that domain goes to. So, bingo, that's the first line. All the other information are different types of records. So we have down here MX. Those are your mail exchangers. Okay, so you have an MX, and they go in order. So MX20 would come first, and that goes to. This is the exchanger. That's actually the server that's handling email for Google. Okay. These are some other text records are important. I'll show you how that comes in handy in a little bit, but there's a whole bunch of different records down here. Most things don't mean anything to you, but one thing I find very, very useful is if we look in these text records right here, here's an example of one. So in this case, at some point, for some reason, Google purchased or is in cooperation with Facebook on some service. It could be some sort of tracking. It could be some sort of network content sharing, whatever it is. Doesn't matter what it is. But Facebook said, "Okay, Google, before we can work with you, we need to verify that you are who you say you are. So we're going to give you this code, this token. You're going to put it in your DNS zone records because supposedly you are the only ones who would have access to it. And then we'll query those records. And if we find that record, we know that you, in fact, are the owner of that domain name." And this is done for obviously a lot of smaller companies. For example, if I'm a small business and I have a domain name and I want to run Google Analytics, right? Google Analytics is a very handy way to do traffic monitoring, see where traffic's coming from. Well, Google's not going to just assign, it has no way to link my account. It doesn't know who I am, but they give me a token to put in my domain record to say, okay, this is who I say I am. They query the domain record publicly because these are records that get distributed across the entire internet. And they'll see that I own the record because I was able to update the DNS. So it's just a way to verify domain ownership by other third-party companies. Okay, but you'll find that a lot, and it's helpful in your investigations if you find a company with not much information, but oh look, they have some sort of Google token. If you can serve subpoenas on Google, you can say, hey, who owns this token? Right? They probably aren't thinking of that when they're adding that record, that text record to their domain. Okay, so it kind of gives them up a little bit. Okay, so that's it for Google. I'm just going to show you real quick. Here's a domain that I know pretty well because I own it, npsec.net, and here's how it's a little different. Here's more realistically what you'll see in most domains that you research. Okay, here's my IP address. That's my server. So if you go to, I don't really run a website, but if you did, that's where that would resolve to, and we can take a look at that in a command line. If we wanted to, but we can trust this. The output here is pretty accurate. So there's my address. This gives me a thing. This is when I registered the domain name, as we talked about before, right? 2011. And you can see here, I host through Google Domains, right? I registered this with Google Domains. So right there, if any issues, if I'm abusing this domain, if I'm spamming with it, for example, someone can come in and say, okay, I'm contacting register-abuse@google.com, because they're obviously not going to contact me. I'm not going to listen to them if I'm spamming, right? Okay, so there's that. So now here's my actual Whois record, and you'll see it's registered through Google, but its name is Contact Privacy Inc., customer number, blah, blah, blah. So I don't publicly release my information. I checked the box when I registered and said, hey, don't make my domain private, and that's what you'll see most of the time. So you'll have to look and see, okay, it's, here's the company that's hosting it privately, and if you can serve them, subpoenas or things like that for information, that would be helpful. And it goes on. It's the admin, the tech contact, all that's linked to this privacy company. So that's good. Now here's my IP address, right? So 192.195.77.81. Who does that belong to? Well, in this case, I was originally hosting with 1&1 Hosting. That's where my website was being hosted. So when I was assigned that IP address, 1&1 gave it to me. Now it's a small number, right? /24 is only 254 different IP addresses, and you see it falls within 192.195.77.0 and 192.195.77.255. So that's a small block. Now 1&1 has probably thousands of those blocks, but that's where my IP fell into. But if I'm an investigator, I can say, okay, I need to go to 1&1 Hosting to get some information about this domain name. I'm obviously, I know I know where it's hosted. If it's a reputable company like 1&1, I can serve them process. Okay, and there's the information for 1&1, right? Again, this contact information belongs to the network IP address, not the domain ownership. And thirdly comes up my DNS record. In this case, you can see that I have mail. My mail is being hosted by Google. Google runs a business class mail service, and I route my mail through Google. So again, as an investigator, I can say, okay, their mail is being hosted by Google. I can serve process on Google. All right, there it is. And the other stuff is probably all generic stuff that you would not have to worry much about at this point. A lot of this is routes back to 1&1 and things like that, but that's it. So this is some really quick hit. Type in an address and get information. You can actually type in an IP address. If you know the IP address of something right off the bat, you can go ahead and type in the IP address here, and you'll get the IP address. You'll just basically go right to the network record, and it goes right to 1&1. It gives you some more information about it, but there it is. As you can see, it goes right back to 1&1. Okay, so use it. It's free. You can use it all you want. Tons of free information. It's quick. And, as an investigator, it's a great place to start when researching who owns and what company does business behind a domain name.